very famously at the end of the year, President-elect Trump was saying, I want this thing done before I'm in office because I don't want to have to deal with it,
The debt limit. Yeah,
the
you're talking
debt
about.
limit.
Yeah.
So tell us what, I mean, we're going to try, I just want to stay away from the partisan aspect. I just want to do the straight financial aspect of this for people at home, not to interject the partisanship into this. But President-elect Trump, former president-elect, we've 72 hours, 96 hours would be easier. We just say President Trump. Anyway, the point was he didn't want to deal with it. So what is the reasoning behind that? Why did it not get done? Why do we care?
So, so that's true. The president called for uh, getting rid of lifting the debt limit prior to him coming into office. And now his reasoning behind that, as far as I understand it, okay, is, and he actually said this, I believe, publicly in some form or fashion, is what often happens when these debt limit increases take place is they become a focal point of negotiation, right? A lot of times they don't lift them just without anything else attached to lifting that debt ceiling, mainly, Scott, because it's kind of like a tough vote. Like, even though the debt limit, increasing it is literally just uh, approving the ability to issue debt for past laws. It's not issuing debt for future laws you haven't done. It's issuing debt to pay for past laws, right? So even though that's the case, it's still not an easy vote, right, for members of Congress, because they can be attacked for, you know, being seen as issuing more debt. So often what takes place is they attach things to them. So incoming President Trump, was worried about the fact that the Democrats could try to use this as leverage against it. Now, what happened was he just wanted to lift it, but he didn't want to lift it in December with any requisite sort of spending reforms or cuts to try to get our debt under control. And so the reason that they weren't able to do that is there's a significant portion of folks within the Republican Party that believe that when you lift the debt limit, it's important to try to use it as a moment to get yourself on a better fiscal course. And they were saying, I'm not going to vote for this debt limit now without requisite spending cuts, right? And so therefore it kind of blew up. It didn't happen. It's still hanging out there. So some debate is going to happen this year, Scott, where they're going to have to come together. They're going to have to discuss the need to lift this debt limit, because they have to lift the debt limit. Because if you don't lift the debt limit, you don't have the ability of the government to borrow. That the government would then default on its obligations, could have huge negative ramifications for the economy. So they have to lift it. They just have to have a conversation about what, if anything, they want to attach to it when they lift this as part of the negotiation. So President Trump wanted to do that in December to kind of get it off his plate, right? But a significant portion of the Republican Party didn't want to do that, right? Because, as I said, they would like to use it as a moment to advance fiscal reforms.
Do you see, before we get into citizen action on this, do you see important dates coming up that we need to be aware of that are really, really critical handle times?
So some of the most critical ones coming up relate to, they're not hard dates, but there are a timeline that Speaker Johnson has put out there. It's out there publicly, a timeline and how they want to advance the ball on some of this big agenda they want to pass as it relates to budget reconciliation, right? So what has to happen to do this budget reconciliation process, right? And again, this is a process where the key is you could try to pack a lot into one bill to try to get around the Senate filibuster. Okay, that's the whole reason they're going to do it. The way they do this is you have to do it in a couple of steps. The first thing you have to do is pass a budget, okay, and a budget resolution. Now, this is not a binding budget. It's not like a document that then all of a sudden changes spending and revenues. But what it is it's supposed to be a blueprint for how Congress sets a path for spending, revenues, deficits, and debt, right? It's a plan, for lack of a better word, right? And what you do in that plan is you kind of lay that plan out, and then you have instructions, is what they call them, to a variety of committees in Congress to go achieve certain savings, certain revenue changes that align with that budget that you then pass in subsequent reconciliation bills. So it's the plan that sets up the process for the ultimate reconciliation bill, in a simplified way of describing it. The reason that's an important marker, okay, for folks to be thinking about when they care about debt and deficits, is they're going to have to put in that budget what their instruction is for how much this bill will reduce or increase the debt or deficit. Okay. And once you put that number in there in that budget next month, which is what they're going to vote on, that's likely what the number will ultimately be when they pass the actual reconciliation bill a few months from now. And so, as a fiscal responsibility group focused on debt and deficits, we are concerned that it's possible that the incentive to try to get this big bill done is so huge for Republicans right now that the thing that might get left out of it is fiscal responsibility, right? That they might actually pass something that might worsen the debt and deficit because some of the tax cuts, extending those can do those if they don't pay for fully them. And we're worried about that. So we're going to hone in on that number next month. And I would encourage folks that want to pay attention to this to pay attention to when they pass this budget next month, what the number is in that budget of how much they're going to increase or reduce the deficit, because that is huge for where this goes this year. So that's one big kind of timeline deadline. That's going to be as soon as next month, Scott. Then keep an eye out for this debt limit increase discussion. That could take place as soon as March because they have some appropriations deadlines there. They might try and have a debate around it then. But otherwise, the big timeline there is probably closer to the summer, is what is projected of when the Treasury Department would run out of room to be able to borrow, and they would need to lift it by the summer. So that would be the other key deadline to hone in on.
Before I get to a couple of final questions, let me ask you, you're a person who studies this every single day. For everyday citizens who are going to be overwhelmed with the data, and then you're going to be overwhelmed by the spin. I mean, a lot of these people are really, really good at shooting the bull, shall we say, right? So you got to separate the data from the nonsense. If you're trying to find information that's not, it's a nice word to say. If you want to try to find information that's just data based and doesn't have partisanship in it, where does a person go?
Well, it's kind of a selfish plug here, but that's what we do at our organization in a large part. So if you go to our organization's website, crfb.org, you will find an abundant amount of short analyses, pieces, and some longer papers for folks that want to dive into the data on this. And when we do our pieces and analysis, Scott, we take them directly from government sources in most cases, and not partisan government sources. We take them from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. We'll take them from the Government Accountability Office, which is another nonpartisan group. We take them from official sources. And so we have plenty of that analysis. No spin, like you said, this is just straight up numbers. And we have, I think I said at the outset, describing our group, we're nonpartisan and bipartisan. Those words get thrown around, right? But we actually are both. And what I mean by that is we're nonpartisan in our analysis. We take our numbers. They're just the numbers, right? We're not trying to put any spin on them. But we're bipartisan in a sense, too, because we have people that work at our organization and are made up from far left to far right, everywhere in between, right? We're just here sort of advocating for our mission. And so you can check out our numbers. You could also go directly to the sources we use, too, the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office at cbo.gov. GAO, others like that. Plenty of places for folks to get those resources.
Finally, I'm wondering, you said you were going out to the states, so you're going to be talking to citizens, and then I'm assuming what you want citizens to do is start engaging with their federal delegation. Mm-hmm. What do you want them to say?
Here's what we want them to say. And I'll say this with the context of something you just said, Scott, as a precursor to this. This is complicated stuff. There's lots of numbers thrown around. So it's hard to figure out how to convey this in a way that really sticks, right? But here's one way I would ask them to do, because we think this might stick based on what we've been telling people. Here's where the fiscal situation is. You can go and tell your members of Congress that you want this dealt with because right now, the interest cost on our national debt, that's not the debt, the actual interest cost, in a given year are almost about $1 trillion, and we're spending more on that than we spend on defense in a given year, okay? And tell your members you're greatly concerned about that, and that is unsustainable. It is, because that resonates That resonates. You can put the $36 trillion debt over a year, but when you're thinking about it, because people get that from a personal finances, business finances perspective, you're spending more on interest than you are on your national security. That is unsustainable, and that's growing. So you tell your members that you're greatly concerned about that, particularly on the Republican side, because they're the ones going to be advancing the reconciliation discussion. But you're concerned about that, and when you're dealing with all these priorities, please make it a priority to get our fiscal house in order as part of this reconciliation process, because it threatens, like I said, our economy, our national security, and future generations.
Just a further clarification on this, I think, what is our military, 3% of GDP, something along those lines?
Yeah.
So what would the debt be, percentage of GDP?
The debt as a percentage of GDP right now is almost 100%.
Okay.
Right? Almost 100% of the accumulated debt. Okay. Our deficit as a percentage of GDP is much higher than defense right now too, but I think its accumulated debt is approaching 100% of GDP, Scott, and it's going to surpass the record high we had, like I said before, right after World War II, was 106%. That's the highest we ever had as a history of our country. But that's when we borrowed to save the free world. Right now, we're borrowing for consumption, okay? And we're just borrowing for consumption. We're just going to continue to do so. So, yes, it's unsustainable, and that would be the message that we really need the delegation in Oklahoma to hear.
If you haven't had your coffee yet while watching this, you're not going to need caffeine to be stimulated now after this conversation.
They might need a different type of drink after this conversation.
100% on that. Mike Murphy's the Senior Vice President, Chief of Staff for the Citizens, or the Committee Responsible Federal Budget. Mike, I hope this is not a one-off, and you'll come back and help explain to Oklahomans, what's going on, and as we hear the rhetoric coming out of D.C., help us understand just what the heck is going on.
I'd love to, Scott. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again, and your kids show great judgment in who they root for, judging by the photograph in the background. Thanks for being here. We'll see you again soon.